She told me, if this house sells by Friday, I'll pay you more money than you've made in your life. Whatever you're thinking, triple it. I was kneeling on her marble bathroom floor with my head halfway into a cabinet, and I said, Marisol, nobody's buying this house. Not until you let me open this wall. The water stain was about the size of a dinner plate. You could have walked past it 100 times and called it nothing. A faint brown bloom spreading up from the baseboard behind the vanity. The kind of thing a stager would hide with a potted fern and a good camera angle. I'd been on my knees for 10 minutes with a flashlight and a moisture meter, and the needle had already told me everything I needed to know before I ever touched the drywall. But nobody in that house knew that yet. As far as the realtor was concerned, I was just a handyman somebody had called to caulk a tub before the open house. Marisol Ave. Let me get her name right. Marisol Avendaro, crouched down next to me in a pair of shoes that cost more than the truck I drove there in, and she made me that offer. Triple whatever I was thinking, and I pulled my head out of the cabinet, looked at that brown stain one more time, and told her the showing on Saturday wasn't happening. Not in that house. Not the way it was. By the end of that week, a handful of people were going to understand why a stain the size of a dinner plate was worth more than the $4.5 million asking price. And by the end of that week, every one of them was also going to find out the thing I'd spent 11 years not telling anybody in this town. But the stain isn't really where it starts. It starts with the decision I made 11 years ago and what it cost me. My name's Wesley Cardoza. I'm 43. These days I do remodels and repairs out of a single cab Ford with 200,000 miles on it, mostly around the north side of Austin, the parts that got rich while I wasn't looking. I'm a licensed general contractor, which means when I sign off on work, my name's on it. If a deck I build comes off the back of a house with people standing on it, the lawyers come looking for my signature first. That's what I am now. It's not what I was. I'll get to that. Let me tell you about my daughter first, because she's the reason any of this matters at all. Penny's 11. She lives with me full-time. Her mom, Claire, and I came apart about 5 years ago, and there's no dramatic story in it. We just wore each other down to nothing and finally admitted it. Claire's in Phoenix now. Penny flies out a couple weeks in the summer and we trade off Christmas. The rest of the year, it's the two of us in a little rented house off Burnett Road and a list of bills I think about more than I'd like. The day this all started was an ordinary Thursday. I picked Penny up from her aftercare program at 5:30, and on the drive home she informed me, in the very grave voice she uses when something has gone wrong in her life, that her egg drop project for science was a catastrophe. It keeps cracking, Dad. I drop it and the egg just splits. Where's it cracking? On the bottom, when it hits. Then the bottom's not your problem, I said. The bottom's just where you find out you had a problem. Your problem's up top, where you're holding the egg. You're not stopping it from moving inside. The shock goes straight through. Don't pad the floor. Suspend the egg so the box can crumple and the egg never feels the hit. She went quiet, chewing on that. We had spaghetti. She rebuilt the whole contraption at the kitchen table with rubber bands in the yogurt cup while I did the dishes. Around 7, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't have saved. A woman named Trish who ran a high-end real estate brokerage I'd done some odd jobs for. Never anything big. She sounded like someone smiling through her teeth. Wesley, I need a favor and I need it tonight. We've got a listing going to showing this weekend, big one, and the seller is, she's particular. There's a little cosmetic thing in the master bath, water spot, nothing, and she wants it gone before Saturday. I told her I had a guy. Can you be my guy? Where's the house? She gave me an address up in the hills west of town, one of those gated stretches where the lots are measured in acres. And then she said the part that made my hand tighten on the phone. It's the Avendaro estate. You know, Marisol Avendaro, the software thing she's selling. I didn't say anything for a second. Trish kept talking and didn't notice. To her, it was just a rich lady and a water stain. She had no idea what she'd just handed me. Because I knew that house. Not the way you know a celebrity's house from a magazine. I knew it the way a man knows a thing he helped build and then watched get taken away from him. I told Penny to be in bed by 9, asked my neighbor Doreen, who's retired and watches her when I get called out, to come sit, and I drove up into the hills with my stomach in a knot the whole way. Here's what I walked into. The Avendaro estate was the property Marisol Avendaro had poured a fortune into after she sold her company. 11,000 square feet, infinity edge pool, the whole thing perched on a slope with a view of the lake that genuinely stopped your breath. She'd bought it half-built from a developer who went bankrupt, and she'd finished it out into a showpiece. And now, for reasons I didn't know yet, she was selling it, and the sale was clearly a big deal to her, because she was there in person at 8 o'clock at night, standing in her own kitchen managing a handyman like the world depended on it. I understood the stakes inside of 3 minutes because everybody told me at once. There was a buyer's agent in the room, a slick guy in an unstructured blazer named Brett Cole, representing some out-of-state couple who'd seen the place on a video tour and wanted to close fast, all cash, before they even flew in. The Saturday showing was really just a formality, a walkthrough for their inspector. Closed that, and Marisol unloaded an 11,000 square foot albatross at top dollar. Lose it, and she was back to carrying it through another season. Brett met me before I'd even set my toolbox down. Tan, easy, a man who'd never been wrong about anything in his life. "You the touch-up guy," he said, and the way he said it told me precisely where I ranked. "It's a pain thing. We've already had eyes on this house. The buyer's people did a desktop review off the disclosures. Everything's clean, so whatever you're doing back there, keep it cosmetic and keep it quick. We've got an inspection Saturday morning and a closing the following week." "You said water spot," I said. "Where's it coming from?" He blinked. It's a stain from the shower, probably. Old splash." "Which way's it spreading, up or down?" "Most paint guys don't ask that." "No reason," I said. But that was a lie. That was the first lie of the night. Because a stain that climbs up a wall from the baseboard isn't from a splash. Water doesn't run uphill. A stain that wicks upward means there's standing water down low behind that wall, soaking up into the drywall like a paper towel in a puddle. And I knew exactly where that water was coming from, because I'd stood in that house 11 years ago and told a man it would. There was a young guy on Trish's team, a kid named Owen, maybe 25, eager and already nervous. He'd done the visual on the room earlier and written it off as cosmetic. He told me he'd run his hand over it, that it was dry to the touch, that it was surface only. I didn't argue with him. I never argue at that stage. The water doesn't care what anybody decided. I just asked him to bring me a flashlight and a utility knife, and I knelt down by the vanity. I didn't cut where the stain was. I went 2 feet to the left of it, low behind the cabinet kickplate, to a spot nobody would think to open because nothing showed there at all. I knew to open it because 11 years ago, I was the one who framed and plumbed that exact wall, and I'd lost an argument about what was going to live inside it. That's where I was, working the knife into the drywall, when Marisol Avendaro found me on the floor and offered to make me rich. For a second she didn't move. I watched her face run the numbers, deciding whether I was a problem she could manage or a fool she could roll right over. "Mr. Cardoza," she said, very level, "I'm going to need you to explain that to me. There are people prepared to wire me $4.5 million next week, and they need to walk through here in 2 days. So explain." I stood up. My knees cracked. 43. "Come here," I said. "I'll show you." I cut a 6-inch square out of the drywall and pulled it free, and the smell came out with it. That wet, sour, black smell you never forget once you've met it. I handed her my flashlight and pointed inside. "Put the light in there." The framing behind that wall was dark. Not shadow dark, wet dark. The bottom plate, the horizontal 2x4 the whole wall sits on, was soaked through and going soft, and crawling up the studs from it was a feathered black-green bloom. "That's mold," I said. "And mold needs water, steady water, for a long time. This didn't happen last month. This wall's been wet for years. Tonight's just the night somebody finally cut the right hole." "It's a moisture issue," Brett said behind me. "It can be remediated. People remediate mold every day." "You don't remediate the cause by spraying the symptom," I said. "Something's feeding this. There's a supply line or a pan drain inside this wall that's been weeping the whole time. You paint over that stain Saturday morning, you'll have a buyer's inspector pull a thermal camera in here, and it'll light up like a stovetop. And then your cash buyers will know they were about to be sold a rotted-out wall in a $4.5 million house, and they'll walk, and they'll tell people why." I looked at Marisol. "And that's the small version. The big version is what's holding this wall up. This is a wet wall in a structural bay, and if the bottom plate's gone soft and the sill's wet, I want to know what the framing underneath the shower's doing before anybody signs anything." Brett made a noise through his nose. "You've been here 20 minutes. And that's where the night turned. Because I was tired and I was kneeling in a house I'd helped build, looking at exactly the failure I'd warned a man about and getting told I'd been there 20 minutes. "I've been here 20 minutes, I said, but I've known about this wall for 11 years. The kitchen went quiet. "What does that mean?" Marisol said. "It means before you fire me, I want you to do one thing. Don't take my word for any of it. Call a plumber, a real leak detection outfit, and have them put a camera and a moisture map on this whole wet wall tonight. And while you're at it, pull the original construction file on this house, the build that the developer started before he went under. Somewhere in that file there's a change order that got denied. Ask whose name is on the note that flagged this exact wall." "Whose name is on it?" she said. I didn't answer that. Not yet. Some things you have to earn the right to say out loud, even when they're about you. "Just make the calls," I said. She looked at me a long moment, and then, and this is the first thing that made me think there was more to Marisol Aventaro than the shoes. She didn't fire me. She took out her phone. "It's 8:30 at night," Brett said. "It's a $4.5 million sale," she said and dialed. While she was finding a number, I did the thing I think actually mattered most. I went out to my truck for my phone, and I came back and I stood in that bathroom and I took pictures. The stain, the open wall, the wet plate, the mold climbing the studs, the moisture meter pegged in the red, time-stamped everyone. Because the second those photos existed, nobody could quietly cut a fresh piece of drywall over that hole, repaint the wall, and pretend Saturday's showing was a clean house. I didn't have a signature to nail it down with the way I would on my own job, but I had the truth in 100 photographs, and the truth doesn't dry out. Owen watched me pale. Did I miss that? "It's behind a kick plate the eye doesn't go to," I said. "It's a hard catch." But the kid deserved the real lesson, not the soft one. Except the stain told you. A stain that climbs is water that's pooling. You felt it dry on the surface, and you stopped. You read the symptom, and you didn't chase it back to the cause. Next time something's off, don't ask, "Is this just cosmetic?" Ask, "What would have to be true for this to be happening?" That question puts your hand right on this plate. He nodded. He'd be all right. The ones who feel sick when they nearly miss something always are. It's the ones who shrug that scare me. Across the kitchen, Marisol was talking low into her phone. Then less low, then she went quiet and just listened for a long time. When she finally lowered it, she came back across the floor looking at me differently. Not warm. Careful. The way you look at something when you realize it isn't what the label said. "I called the leak company I use for my rentals," she said slowly. "They're sending a crew tonight." And then I called my assistant and had her dig up the construction file from the developer's bankruptcy. She paused. "There's a denied change order in it. From during the build, a subcontractor flagged a drain pan and a vent stack routed through a structural bay and recommended rerouting it before the walls closed up. The developer denied it, said it would blow the schedule." She looked at me. The notes initialed. WC. I waited. "That's you," she said. It wasn't a question. So I told her. Standing in the kitchen of a house I'd helped frame, at 9 o'clock at night, I finally told somebody the whole thing. I didn't start as a remodel guy and stay one. I started as a carpenter at 19 because I loved the way a building tells you the truth if you know how to read it. By 30, I had my own crew and a real reputation, and a developer named Lyle Aldis hired me as the lead builder on a row of luxury spec houses up in these hills. This house was one of them. The flagship. The one he was going to live in himself if it didn't sell first. "You built this house," Marisol said. "I built the bones of it," I said. "I ran the crew through framing and rough-in, and during the rough plumbing, I found a problem. The architect had a shower drain and a vent stack routed straight down through a structural bay, a wall that carries real load, with no proper pan and no way to ever inspect it once the drywall went up. I told Lyle it was going to leak someday, and when it did, it'd leak inside a load-bearing wall where nobody would see it until the framing was already gone. I wanted it rerouted while the walls were still open. 2 days of work, maybe 3. This is the part I'd never told anybody in this town. Not Trish, not the guys I worked with. They thought I was a contractor with a chip on his shoulder and good instincts. Nobody knew about the trailer office and the argument in it. "It would have cost him a few $1,000s and pushed his framing inspection a week," I said. He had a buyer sniffing around and a construction loan eating him alive. He told me to close the walls and stop being a problem. So I wrote it up, a formal change order recommending the reroute, with the failure spelled out: water intrusion into a structural bay, concealed, no inspection access. I signed it and I initialed it and I made him sign the denial. That denial's what's in your file. And then what? Marisol said. And then he closed the walls, I said. And he made the rest of that job miserable for me, found reasons to short my draws, told other builders I was difficult, that I padded everything, that I cried wolf. By the time those houses sold, he put enough poison around that the work dried up. I'd built half the nice houses on this ridge, and suddenly nobody'd return my calls. I lost the crew. I lost the company. I spent 2 years close to losing the house I lived in. And eventually I went back to the only thing I ever fully trusted, which was working with my own 2 hands and putting my own name on small jobs I could stand behind. Lyle Aldis went bankrupt about 4 years later, and somebody else finished this house out, and I drove past the bottom of this driveway maybe 1,000 times since, and never once came up it. I looked at the open wall, at the black bloom in the flashlight beam. For 6 years I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe I really was the difficult guy who couldn't let a thing go. And then tonight Trish calls me about a water stain in a master bath in a house up in these hills, and I drive up here, and I open a wall nobody opens, and there it is. Exactly where I said it'd be, exactly the way I said it'd happen. Nobody said anything for a while. Somewhere in that big quiet house a clock was ticking. You could have told me who you were the second I doubted you, Marisol said, instead of letting me stand here and threaten to fire you. If I'd led with I built this house, trust me, I'd have been one more guy with a grudge and a story, I said. The photos don't care who I used to be. The plumber's camera doesn't care. The wall's wet whether I'm a genius or a crank. I'd rather the house speak for me. It always has. She looked at me a long moment. My father built things with his hands, she said quietly, before he built anything else. And then she didn't explain it, and I didn't ask. What I didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that there was one more thing buried in this, and it was worse than a wet wall. The lead crew showed up a little before 10. The lead tech was a steady, gray-bearded guy named Hollis Trujillo, and he came in, looked at the open wall, then looked at me, and stopped. Cardoza, he said, you ran the framing on the Aldis houses. Long time ago. My old boss subbed the plumbing on this ridge. He used to tell a story about a builder who tried to make Aldis reroute a wet wall and got run out of town for it. He looked at the black studs and the soft plate, because it wasn't a story. He ran a borescope deep into the wall and put a thermal camera on the whole bay, and what he found was worse than I'd thought. The drain pan I'd warned about had finally failed, sure, but the slow leak had been running for years and it hadn't stayed in one place. It had wicked sideways along the bottom plate and down into the framing under the shower, into a beam pocket where a structural member tied into the floor system. He pulled a probe out of that pocket and the wood came with it, soft as a sponge. This load-bearing post under the showers got rot at the base, Hollis said, and he said it carefully. And the way this floor's framed, that post is carrying a chunk of the second story over the master suite. He looked at Marisol, then at me. I'm not saying anybody's falling through a floor tonight, but you could not let an inspector's moisture probe touch this house on Saturday. And honestly, ma'am, I wouldn't be hosting a crowd up in that master suite until somebody opens this floor and shores that post. The kitchen went dead quiet. Marisol stood there staring into that wall like it was a photograph of something terrible that hadn't happened yet, and I understood she was doing the same arithmetic I was, except in her version it was her own house, the thing she'd poured a fortune and a piece of herself into, and a roomful of strangers she was about to walk through it. I had 40 people up here for a party in March, she said, not to me, to the wall. We were all standing up in that suite watching the storm come across the lake. She didn't cry. She wasn't built that way. But something went out of her face, and something else came into it, and when she finally turned to me, her voice had lost every bit of the steel it had carried an hour before. I offered you money to paint over that, she said. I stood right there and offered to triple whatever you were thinking if you'd make it go away for Saturday. You did. And you told me the showing wasn't happening. I did. She nodded slowly. And 11 years ago, you tried to stop this before the walls ever closed, and a man chose his schedule over you, and it cost you everything. It did. And you came back up this driveway anyway, tonight, for a caulk job. The house doesn't care about my history, I said, and it turns out neither does the rot. There's a part of this that's bigger than that night, and it's the part I'm actually proud of. Because of those time-stamped photos and because of an 11-year-old change order with my initials on it sitting in a bankruptcy file, this stopped being one rich lady's bad luck. Marisol didn't paint over it and dump the house on the cash buyers and walk away clean. A lot of people in her position would have. Instead, the next morning, before anybody made her, she called Brett's clients herself and told them exactly what was in the wall and pulled the house off the market. Then she called the county. Because here's the thing, Hollis turned up when he and I went looking the next week. Lyle Aldous hadn't done it just once. He'd built a whole row of these houses on the same schedule with the same shortcuts and that same wet wall detail. Vent and drain run through a structural bay with no pan and no access was in the plans for at least 4 of them. 4 houses full of families now that nobody had ever looked inside the walls of because the man who tried to flag it got run off the job and the note got buried in a bankruptcy. Marisol had a lawyer and a budget and a grudge of her own by then, and she used all 3. She got the original plan sets pulled. She paid Hollis's company to do a non-invasive scan on every one of those houses that the current owners would allow. 2 of the 4 came back wet. One was nearly as bad as hers. A young couple with a toddler who had no idea the post under their stairs was soft at the base. They got it shored before anything came of it. I think about that house more than I think about Marisol's, honestly. Hers had me crawling under a vanity at 8 o'clock on a Thursday by pure dumb luck. That one had nobody. The only thing standing between that kid and a bad day was a note. A younger, angrier version of me wrote in a job trailer 11 years ago, and an heiress stubborn enough to chase it down. You do the right thing once, quietly, and it cost you your whole career, and you spend years thinking it meant nothing. And then one cold night it reaches out and protects people you'll never meet, in houses you'll never set foot in. I don't have a clean way to say what that did to me. I just know I'd needed it longer than I knew. Now, I told you there's no fairy tale here, and there isn't. Marisol didn't hand me a check for $3 million. Real life doesn't run that way, and honestly, if she'd tried, it would have cheapened the whole thing. What she did was better, and it took her a few weeks, because she did it right instead of dramatic. The sale fell apart, of course. You can't tell an all-cash buyer the showpiece house has a rotted structural post and expect them to feel good about it. Brett's clients walked, and Brett walked with them. And the most important sale of Marisol's year that week became a hole in the floor and a 6-figure repair bill. A lot of people in that spot bury the contractor who blew it up. She didn't. About 3 weeks later, and I'll get the timing right because it matters to me, she asked me to come back up to the house, and she made me an offer. Not a tip. Not a thank you check. She'd decided, she said, that she wasn't going to sell the place after all, that she was tired of running from a house she actually loved because it had bad bones she didn't put there. She wanted it gutted back to where the problems lived and rebuilt right, every wet wall opened, every shortcut fixed, done by somebody who'd put his own name on it and mean it. She wanted me to run the job, the whole job, on my terms, in writing, like adults. We negotiated it on paper. I told her the thing I'd learned the hard way was that the only thing a builder's word is worth is that it can't be bought or rushed, and the minute it can be, it's worth nothing, and so is every wall it ever closed up. So here's what I asked for and what she put in the contract. Full authority to open any wall I had reason to suspect, no asking permission, no fighting about the cost of finding out. A schedule with enough room in it that nobody, including me, ever had to choose between the calendar and the truth. And a clause that said if I found something and called a stop, the stop stood, and there was no penalty to me for being careful, even if I turned out to be wrong. Because the day you punish a man for a stop that wasn't strictly necessary is the day every man on your job quietly learns to stop calling stops. And then one day the stop that needed calling never comes. She signed all of it. 11 years ago, she said, when she put the pen down. A man decided your no was too expensive. I'd like this house to be the one that decided it wasn't. I didn't have anything to say to that, so I just signed my name under hers. I got home late the night we finalized it, about 3 weeks, almost to the day after the night with the flashlight. Penny was at the kitchen table, and the egg contraption was gone. "How'd the egg drop go?" I asked. She held up a ribbon. Read, "Second place." "Second? What beat you?" "A kid built a parachute out of a trash bag." She rolled her eyes exactly the way her mother used to. "Everybody loves a parachute." "But Dad," and she got serious, that careful all the way through it serious she gets. "The teacher dropped mine off the second floor rail, and the egg didn't even have a crack. The parachute one cracked. Mine just looked boring." I sat down across from her. "You know why yours held?" "Because I didn't pad the bottom," she said. "I suspended the egg so it never felt the hit." "Where the force goes," I said, "not the part you can see." She grinned and went back to whatever she was building next. A trebuchet, I'm fairly sure. God help my kitchen. And I sat there and thought about a brown stain the size of a dinner plate, low on a wall behind a vanity, in the one bay nobody's supposed to need to open, right where all the water was hiding. And I thought about a younger man in a job trailer 11 years ago, losing an argument and a livelihood, making a man sign a piece of paper he was sure nobody would ever read again. It got read. It just took 11 years and one stain to get there. I make a decent living now, better than decent, since the Avendaro job led to 3 more like it from people who heard how it went. I'll never be the kind of rich she offered me that night. There's a version of that Thursday where I take the money, paint the wall, and I'm flush for a year. And there's no version of that Thursday where I take the money and still get to sit across a kitchen table from my kid and explain why you reinforce the part nobody can see. I pick the table. I'd pick it again every single time. So let me ask you just one thing before you go. I went back to swinging a hammer into the very houses that cost me everything, and I waited years without ever knowing if being right would ever matter to a single soul. Here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever been the one in the room who said the hard no, the one nobody wanted to hear? And did it ever come back around the way mine finally did? Or are you still waiting on it? Tell me down in the comments. I read them, and I'd honestly like to know. A brown stain the size of a dinner plate is still sitting in my mind all these months later. It was nothing to look at, and it was everything. I keep coming back to that, because the whole night turned on a small thing that almost everybody had already agreed not to see. Brett saw it and called it paint. Owen ran his hand over it and called it dry. Even Marisol, standing in her own kitchen, looked at it and saw a problem she could pay to disappear. The wall had been telling the truth for years. The only thing missing was somebody willing to cut the hole. I think the reason it cost me my company 11 years ago is the same reason it saved that young couple's kid this year. I refused to close a wall I knew was wrong. That refusal was the cause, and everything that came after. Losing the crew, losing the work, losing the house I almost couldn't keep, was the effect of a man named Lyle Aldis deciding my no was too expensive. But causes don't expire just because the bill comes late. The note I made him sign sat in a file for over a decade, and then one cold Thursday it reached out and shored up a post under a stranger's stairs. You don't always get to see the whole chain. You just have to trust that the link you forge holds. If I've learned anything worth handing to Penny across that kitchen table, it's that being right is only the start. You have to be honest enough to open the wall when it's easier to paint over it, and that honesty has to be the kind nobody can buy, because the second it has a price, it isn't worth anything. You have to be sharp enough to read the symptom and chase it back to the cause, instead of stopping at the surface. That's the difference between a man who feels a wall is dry and a man who knows why a stain climbs. And you have to be tough enough to wait, tough enough to swing a hammer into the same houses that broke you, for years, without any promise that being right will ever matter to a single soul. That last one is the hardest, and it's the one I almost didn't have. There were nights I was sure I'd been the fool, not the only honest man on the job. What got me through wasn't certainty. It was just showing up, doing small work I could stand behind, and refusing to become a man who shrugs. So when Penny tells me her egg didn't crack because she suspended it where the force couldn't reach it, I don't just hear a science project. I hear a kid learning that you protect what matters by reinforcing the part nobody can see. Do the quiet right thing. Read deeper than the surface. Outlast the years that tell you it meant nothing. I picked the kitchen table over the check, and I pick it again every single time.